From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. Our guest for this broadcast is an old friend, Chris Farrell. And Chris and I have done things together, including a visit to Panama some years ago where we did our best to salvage U.S. vital interest. But let me tell you something about Chris. He joined Judicial Watch in 1999 as the organization's Director of Investigations and Research, and he's been on the board of Judicial Watch since 2003. He hails from Long Island in New York. He was a distinguished military graduate from Fordham University with a BA in history, whereupon he accepted a regular Army commission and served as a military intelligence officer, specializing in counterintelligence and human intelligence. Chris is a graduate of Military Intelligence Officers Basic and Advanced Courses, the U.S. Army Advanced Counterintelligence Training Course, the Combined Armed Services Staff School of the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, the Defense Intelligence Agency's Military Operations Training Course, and the Haus-Riesen Institute for Politik and Wirtschaft in Hamburg, Germany. And I can tell you a lot more. He has not slowed down in any way. He's currently a senior staff associate of Columbia University's National Center for Disaster Preparedness. He's a member of the Association of Former Intelligence Officers, the American Society of Access Professionals, the International Counterterrorism Officers Association, the Society of Competitive Intelligence Professionals, and he's a constituent member of the State Department's Overseas Security Advisory Council. He represents Judicial Watch at UN headquarters. Chris, if you were president, what would you be doing about terrorism that Mr. Obama is not doing?
Well, first, I think I'd take it seriously and not make it a talking point or a political pawn, but instead actually go after and arrest or kill those persons who have gone after American citizens and soldiers. This isn't a game. It's not a strategy session. It's not something to be debated in the faculty lounge. This is a deadly serious threat to our nation, to our citizens and our interests around the world, and needs to be treated as such and not as a obscure theoretical problem.
To what degree do screenings at our airports fight terrorism?
They don't. They're kabuki theater. In large part, they're an effort to reassure the public that everything's just fine and that if they're subjected to rigorous Fourth Amendment violations, that somehow that'll stop terrorists from doing what they want to do.
Yeah, they're guilty of warrantless searches and seizures.
They are. So I understand the psychology behind it, but it does very little to actually secure the flying public.
Mm-hmm. And surely control of our borders would be something that would help fight terrorism.
That would be an enormously productive step. Right now, our southern border, of course, is incredibly porous. All sorts of folks cross our southern border all the time.
I think 32 nationals from 32 countries were identified as part of a pickup sweep very recently.
Yes, and these are all what they refer to as special interest aliens, or SIAs, other than Mexicans. These are folks from other countries that we have particular interest in, mostly because they pose an incredible threat to our interests. And so, the Border Patrol, they're given a mission impossible. They're understaffed, under-equipped, undermanned, undertrained, and set out to do a nearly impossible job, when really the Defense Department should be given a one-sentence order, and that one-sentence order should be secure the southern border of the United States, period.
Why aren't you concerned about the Canadian border? You've probably read about the recent agreement between the Prime Minister of Canada and the supposed President of the United States to create a North American perimeter,
sure,
which some people say is a first step toward a North American Union and which essentially opens up the Canadian border.
It is. It's the latest incarnation of the Security and Prosperity Partnership, which is another North American Union effort. The activities and the procedures remain the same. They just keep renaming it over and over again and giving it new angles. But our northern border, likewise, is very vulnerable. It's a question of volume. Volume at the southern border perhaps greater threat in the sense of bad guys on the northern border. I mean, the joke about Toronto is that it's Toronto because of the population. Yeah. So it's not to be dismissed or diminished. It's just that the southern border is so incredibly wide open.
Yeah. What else would you do if you were president?
I think the biggest thing really is simply saying that directing the Department of Defense to secure the southern border. It's a one-sentence order. The DoD knows how to do it with their eyes closed. They've guarded the east-west German border, north-south Korean border, the Iran-Iraq border. They know how to do borders very, very well. In my past life experience, I've done it myself. And so with a secured southern border, and I'm not saying lock it down. I'm simply saying secure it in the sense that we know who's coming and going. Trade would continue, the free passage of people and goods, but you'd know who was coming and going. That's imperative. It's a stop the bleeding issue, and that's what has to happen.
What does our presence in Afghanistan, which has gone on for, 9 years, it has cost many billions of dollars, what does it do to fight terrorism?
Arguably, it's a recruiting poster to increase terrorism, particularly with, Al-Qaeda uses that military occupation and our efforts to secure the country, which is, a straight uphill battle. They use that as a means to say, aha, see, the Americans are doing what the Americans always do. And then there's just the dollars and cents aspect of it. We're expending $200,000 smart missiles to blow up mud huts. That's bad economics. That just doesn't make sense. You can only do that for so long before, you're inflicting wounds, economic wounds and readiness wounds on our own military that make it very difficult to come back.
No outside entity has succeeded in dealing effectively with the tribal aspects of Afghanistan.
Since Alexander.
Yeah. And in the 19th century, the Brits failed miserably, repeatedly.
Yes.
The Russians failed, and now we are failing.
I was talking with a very good friend of mine, a colleague from when I was an intelligence officer, who just yesterday, in fact, returned from Afghanistan. And he said, well, we're marching in the footsteps of Alexander, and we have more toys and more technology and better communications, but we're reinventing the wheel again. So at some point, a decision needs to be made about the best, most effective course, and that course involves an exit. The question is how.
Were we to leave expeditiously, would the threat of terrorism increase?
That's a tough. I mean, I don't know that I can come up with an answer on that. In one regard, we would take away a propaganda tool from our opponents. In another sense, though, we would be, in theory, turning over a playground for the worst elements to gather. So it kind of cuts both ways.
There was a review of Don Rumsfeld's new book, Knowns and Unknowns, in which the reviewer blamed Rumsfeld for the fact that Osama bin Laden is still floating around, despite Rumsfeld's tenure as defense secretary, first the youngest and then the oldest. Do you think Osama bin Laden is alive?
I do. I think there's sufficient evidence that's been produced, both audio and video, that he's hunkered down in the wilds of Waziristan or sitting in Pakistan in this sort of privileged enclave that not that we can't, but I'll just say we're unable to get to for whatever reason. And he's biding his time, which is what he's very good at.
What about the government of Pakistan? They have control of a great many nuclear weapons. How should we be dealing with Pakistan?
A friend of mine once said that Pakistan is a wonderful army with its own country. and that's a very true, that's a truism. I know from a variety of sources that Pakistan's nukes are of enormous interest to the Defense Department, to our country, and that a lot of folks spend a lot of time watching that very, very carefully because it's unacceptable that they would fall into the wrong hands.
What about the people running the government of Pakistan? How would you assess them?
There's a couple of different factions. There are those that created the Taliban. There are those who are sort of, leftover Anglophiles, sort of, sons of the empire. There are those who are, probably somewhere in between, sort of nationalists who want that Pakistani army to continue to flex its muscles. And it's a cobbled together hybrid. I don't know that there's one answer for hybrid.
In highlighting the Taliban as a threat, it seems to be the main reason for focusing on the Taliban is their attitude toward the role of women. That seems to drive much of our policy.
Yeah, it's a one-dimensional description of what the Taliban is about. It may play well on the Today Show or something for a 3-minute segment.
Or at Hillary Rodham's cocktail parties.
But true. But there's a lot more to it than whether someone's in a burqa or not.
Yeah. We have to take a break. We'll be back with Chris Farrell right after these messages. Please stay tuned.
You are a defender of liberty. You spoke out.
That is part of your job.
You were heard in Congress.
No.
You marched. You created a new movement. You endured attacks.
You see folks waving tea bags around.
Now you can help to
Repeal the bill.
go to sendtheramessage.com. Print the pledge to repeal Obamacare. Send it to your representative, senators, and candidates to sign that they pledge to repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill now.
Go to sendtheramessage.com and help.
Repeal the bill.
Hello, I'm Steve Forbes, chairman of Forbes Media, here to urge you to watch Conservative Roundtable if you want to learn about the issues that matter and what you can do to get our country back on the right track.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, the sponsor of Conservative Roundtable, with our guest, Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch, a leading intelligence expert. Well, how does Judicial Watch set its priorities?
Well, first of all, we're a membership organization, so we're very attentive to what our members around the country tell us that they're interested in. We poll them regularly. There's about 400,000 people around the country who actively support us. We ask them what they think is important, and they give us very clear, very loud feedback as to what they want us to pursue.
Judicial Watch has been frequently successful in using the Freedom of Information Act to pursue the bad guys and to set policy. Tell us about that.
Sure. It's a very important tool. It allows us to expose government operations, what the government is up to and what it's not up to, and then educate the public about government functions. It's a federal law that allows anyone, actually, to ask for the government to produce records on a particular topic. That's the very high-level view of it. There's an enormous amount of detail and minutia about how the law is carried out. But importantly, it allows anybody to ask any executive department for records about what the government is up to. And they're compelled. It's a disclosure statute. They must produce records.
But they can stall, can't they?
They dilly and dally and stall. What we do, and this is the margin of difference, is we regularly litigate. We regularly go into court and sue the government to force them to produce the records. And that's the leverage. That's what makes us more effective than the average requester.
One of the things I tried to do years ago was extend the FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to cover the indirect subsidies. Let's say HHS funded the National Welfare Rights Organization. Actually, OEO did, the agency that I headed.
Yeah.
And then the FOIA, in my view, ought to cover subordinate entities, which is where much of the problems occur.
It's interesting that you raised that because we are involved in litigation right now over Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which were government-sponsored entities that you would think would be subordinate to HUD, Housing and Urban Development. And, of course, they've now been taken into receivership, or conservatorship, actually, by the Federal Housing Finance Agency. We've asked for their lobbying policies because the two biggest beneficiaries, of course, are Barack Obama. He's, I think, number 2, and the first one had been, I want to say Kerry had been a huge recipient as well, perhaps Dodd and also Barney Frank, all big beneficiaries.
Yep.
So we want to know, what were your policies? How did you arrive at who you gave your money to for lobbying purposes? And, of course, they're claiming they can't possibly give that to us.
Yeah.
So we're litigating it right now, and it's a very important question.
Well, government unionism has become a big issue recently, thanks to Governor Walker of Wisconsin and other governors who've picked up the cudgels on that one. When I was director of the Office of Economic Opportunity, that was something that was of great interest to me. In my prior assignment, when I was head of the President's Youth Council, one of the people on my staff was Mildred Worf, whose husband Jerry founded AFSCME, the American Federation of State, County, and Municipal Employees. Mm-hmm. Chester Arthur is one of my least favorite presidents because of his role in the creation of civil service. Mm-hmm. But the interesting part about AFSCME and government unions generally is that they not only benefit from civil service protection, they have the additional protection of the unions. It's a double steal from the American taxpayer. And even FDR said that collective bargaining by government unions should be a no-no. And the so-called fans of FDR have forgotten his admonition.
And what we're left with now are enormous pension plans that have been, all sorts of promises and guarantees have been made, and there's no money. They're unfunded, or they're grossly underfunded. And the consequences for retirees who have, in good faith, paid their money in and been told, no problem, we have you covered, are in for a very rude awakening.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about robbing the Social Security Trust Fund as if there were a Social Security Trust Fund.
Yeah, it's gone.
And there is not. There are pieces of paper that say, I owe you nothing, or something, or whatever it may be.
Later, come back and talk to us. Yeah, yeah.
And someday all these chickens are going to come home to roost.
They are. And there's a tidal wave of debt, a sort of a second threat that's awaiting economically. And when that starts to impact, I don't know, there are no good answers. There are no easy ways out of this.
The United States is living on borrowed time. And that time is going to be a payback. The old saying, biblically and otherwise, is that the debtor is slave to the creditor. The debtor is slave to the lender. And we have a situation where our manufacturing base has been undermined. Much of it has gone to Red China and to other places.
Yep.
And I think one of the reasons our presidents, not just Obama, but George Bush, have been reluctant to take Red China head on and deal with them as we ought, is because they essentially have us by the cojones.
It's true. I mean, it's Chinese money that is funding our day-to-day operations. It's just a fact. Yeah. A lot of the emotion and adrenaline can be bled off the question, and it's just reduced to math. You know, the math.
That's right.
Forget about all the arguments. The math is very compelling, and it's disturbing. So.
And the folks in Beijing certainly understand that. And I'm not an interventionist. I believe the duty of our military is to protect the population and territory of the United States, not to look for dragons to slay around the world. However, I do believe that it's very important for us to be faithful to our commitments to the Free Chinese on Taiwan, because they limit the ability of Red China to project power. And by causing the Red Chinese to think at least twice, and maybe more than twice, about using their missiles against Taiwan, is the possibility of our acting as a deterrent. But one of the prominent Red Chinese military leaders said that they're increasingly convinced that the United States will never be willing to trade Los Angeles for Taiwan.
Yeah.
And
there's a lack of political will, and they can keep raising the stakes.
Yeah. And they have the ability to deliver missiles to Los Angeles with nuclear warheads.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah. Well, what about the Middle East? There have been many riots, expressions of opposition to incumbent regimes, and the United States has intervened in Muslim countries. We're now intervening in Libya, this time with the support of the Arab League. How long can our principal ally in the area, Saudi Arabia, survive this kind of opposition?
Our principal ally went into Bahrain against our wishes with armed...
Was that against our wishes?
That's my understanding of it. However imperfect, I mean, that's what I believe it to be true. And one of the things that we don't know is what all these opposition groups and forces, who they really are.
Are they the Muslim Brotherhood or something else?
Or something else, and you don't even know what it is that you're supposedly supporting and encouraging and funding. So I'm leery, because I think that there are often folks who have approached us who said, hey, listen, we're going to fight for mom, dad, and apple pie and all the good things, and we really don't know who or what they are or what their intentions are. And I'm always reminded of Fidel Castro. About 2 years after he came out of the jungle, he was the great liberator of Cuba, and he was standing in Havana at this enormous reception with this crowd of folks, and his answer was, elections? What for? And we could find ourselves with our own liberator of Yemen.
He was called the George Washington of Cuba.
Yeah.
And I was at Harvard at the time of his ascension, and in fact, I had the opportunity to pull his beard as he marched toward the Harvard Faculty Club past the Harvard Union. That was my only contact with Castro. But the sign that some of the kids held up was, I'm Fidel Castro, I got my job through the New York Times. and there's a lot of truth to that, because the Times misrepresented who Castro was, just as when Stalin was in charge, Walter Duranty, a famous reporter for the New York Times,
lied repeatedly,
whitewashed Stalin and lied totally.
Yep.
And it helped confuse the American people and undermine support for a policy that would have rescued millions of people had we been tougher on it. We're going to have to take another break, and when we come back, you're going to have a couple of minutes to tell people how they can provide support, not financial, that's not allowed, but support, get information about Judicial Watch, and whatever concluding comments you want to make. Stay with us. I'll be right back with Chris Farrell after these messages.
Hey, listen. This is the greatest thing. I want to tell you something. Something's happening in this country. And I want to tell you, look around my friends here. My friends here in Washington, come over here. See all these great people? These great folks are here because they want to take the country back to the direction of the Founding Fathers and stop all this nonsense that's going on and stop this, this immersion into socialism, which is happening. We've got to stop it. And every day we're losing a little bit of our freedom. But the answer is that the individual citizens can make a difference. They can walk through these houses of Congress. They can look their congressman in the eye and say, hey, vote this bill down. Get rid of it. We got a lot of work to do. And the first thing we have to do is get rid of the garbage and the attacks on our freedoms. This is it. So anyway, that's what these guys are doing here today to do. Yes! And I say, all of you guys out there, with the sound of my voice and the visual that this great gentleman has created, get down here and do your responsible citizenship by going and seeing your representatives and telling them, what you want, because this is your house. It's not their house. Get in there and tell them what to do, and let's begin cleaning this country up. A big mess has been created in only a year's time, in 9 months' time, really. A big mess we have to recover from. We got to start work. We got to throw some people out. So anyway, I love this country. I love you. Go do your job. Thank you for your help. Thank you.
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on this program, please send contact information to us. Our fax number is 703-281-4108. Our mailing address is 450 Maple Avenue East, and that's in Vienna, Virginia, 22180. With no cost or obligation, we'll send you information which may be of interest, including my twice-monthly newsletter, the Howard Phillips Issues and Strategy Bulletin. Chris Farrell has been a terrific guest. He's a man who knows a lot about many things. And in the couple minutes remaining, Chris, first of all, tell people how they can get in touch with Judicial Watch.
Sure. The best way, the fastest way, is, of course, going to our website, which is judicialwatch.org, O-R-G. When you get to our website, you will find a wealth of information. Our documents and records that we get through the Freedom of Information Act, one recent one I think is very compelling, has to do with how Al-Qaeda recruits juveniles, and then in the same breath, how they use juveniles to target and attack children. There's an entire debriefing we obtained from Guantanamo detainees talking about how it's the position of Al-Qaeda that attacking civilians and children is completely legitimate, much like in Beslan, Russia, you'll remember from a few years back, and how an attack like that is a worthwhile thing for psychological operations against non-believers. So documents like that, very compelling, very interesting. Folks can sign up for our newsletter at judicialwatch.org as well. It's just a great resource.
Well, we're grateful for the work Judicial Watch does and for your leading role in that organization and the work you've done with the Conservative Caucus over the years. Our website is www.conservativeusa.org. And Chris, thanks so much for being our guest.
Thank you, Howard.
And thank you for watching Conservative Roundtable.